Hey folks, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you, you can unlock unlimited access to political news, commentary, opinion, and a whole lot more at inforum.news/port for only 99 cents a month for your first 3 months. Hurry, get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Hey folks, welcome to Plain Talk. It's Monday, and we're going to talk about, some tough issues. And I think issues that, although they pre-existed what's happening in Ukraine, I think have come into sharper focus since what's happened there, because we're starting to struggle with, so much of our economy is global now. But that also means that at times, things that people want to do, even very local projects, can touch on very international and oftentimes very problematic things. Our state has been divesting, for instance, from Russia because we have seen the results of Vladimir Putin's bloody aggression in Ukraine and have decided that we don't want to be invested as a nation, really, and as a state. We don't want to be invested in Russia anymore, or even in countries based in Russia, as a way of exerting influence over that situation. Another part of that debate is China, and that's something that I think we're still not reckoned with. Our economy, nationally, locally, is enmeshed with China. We all remember during the 2018 U.S. Senate race between Kevin Cramer and Heidi Heitkamp, where soybean sales to China became a major campaign issue because, completely understandably, our local soybean growers want to sell soybeans, and they're selling them to China. But meanwhile, we have a trade war with China motivated by, frankly, some not so great things that the country of China is doing. Anyway, a flashpoint for this debate has become a corn milling project near the city of Grand Forks. The owner of the project is an organization called the Fufeng Group. They're a very large China-based agricultural company, and they've come to Grand Forks, and but for the connection to China, their proposal has all the usual controversies attendant to this sort of a project. There's some NIMBYism. People are, and I say NIMBYism, I don't want to be dismissive of people who are concerned about things like traffic and smell and noise. Those are perfectly valid concerns. We may disagree over them, but people are right to be concerned about those things. But adding an extra layer of complexity to that is the fact that Fufeng is based in China. And we're having a hard time when we look at China. We look at, frankly, China is supportive of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China has millions of people in forced labor camps, concentration camps, frankly. And that's a difficult thing. Where are those lines when it comes to doing business with China? They're not always so easy to find. Here to talk with me about all of this is Grand Forks Mayor Brandon Bochenski, who is one of many Grand Forks officials who support this project. Mayor Bochenski, thank you for the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I wanted to start off and make it clear that although I am skeptical at this point of allowing Chinese-based companies. I really think that we need a realignment, a rethinking of how we do business with companies that are based in places like China and Russia. That being said, I completely understand your side of this debate as well. And I think some of the debate, maybe we should talk about that first, has been really unfortunate in its tone and its tenor. We had a gentleman who showed up to the Grand Forks, I wrote about it, who showed up to the Grand Forks City Council meeting about Fufeng and was trying to execute a citizen's arrest on the council. And that kind of thing is just deeply, deeply unhelpful. So, first of all, tell us, what's it been like to have this debate about a project like this in that environment?
Well, obviously it's challenging. And when you have people that are coming in and doing things like that, it takes away from the real issues that you're trying to discuss. And yeah, right now, I mean, looking at this project, if something does pop up, or we have some federal agency or apparatus that says, "Hey, we've got real concerns here," we're ready to back down and shut the project down right away. From what we're seeing right now, from the people in town, there's a certain contingency, and whether it's related to the Chinese factor, whether it's related to pollution, odor concerns. They're coming forward, and I think that's good. That's what's supposed to happen. But the personal attacks make it really difficult. I think certain council members have been hit pretty hard as well. And it makes it tough to go in and do your job.
Well, it really does, and that's certainly not unique to this issue. It seems like across our society, we've lost our ability to function in that way without demonizing the people that we maybe disagree with. Which is unfortunate. So many of the people who are listen, I've been writing about politics in North Dakota for a long time, and one of the things I learned is that the person who's on the other side from you in this debate might be on your side in the next debate if you didn't call him a bunch of names, right? So, try to have a longer point of view on this. Recently, a few weeks ago, the council took action. And really approved what I think is a development plan. I don't know that it's the final because there's still some studies that are out looking into traffic and noise and some things like that. Tell us, what's the status of this project as it is?
Yeah, so the city attorney's really, I think he's a really intelligent guy. And the way he set this up was this development agreement allows us to go forward and study the odor, the traffic, the environmental concerns, the plumes, all the things we need to make sure we dot the I's and cross the T's on. We're going to be able to do that, and the company's going to pay for it. So rather than us paying $1 million, $1.5 million to go study these things and find out this isn't feasible, and then we're on the hook for that, he set it up where we can back out of the deal if any of these are concerns. We also have a catch-all that says any government requirements, any governmental policies, governmental regulations that can't be met, we can also back out of it. So it gives us the protection while we're studying these things, and it's using a third party. So Black & Veatch, A2S, these are nationally renowned companies that are looking at these things, looking at the specifications of the plant. So we're not just taking their word for it when it comes to these types of items.
So there's still, this isn't a done deal. There's a presumption that it's a done deal, assuming that we're not going to find anything that's alarming in any of these studies, which, again, I think is just the right and orderly process. What interests me a lot more about this, and it's hard because we get out of the realm of demonstrable public policy, right, where we can have, dollars and cents, and we can make arguments, and we can talk about, we can measure things and do studies. This is a more philosophical thing, and I think the difficulty is, where do we draw the line when it comes to, companies that are based in a place like China doing business in America? And I say that we all have products. I'm looking at my desk here. I probably have a dozen products that were made in China, right, that I bought without even considering that. So I understand it's a complex issue, but do you think, philosophically, where's the line for you, or do we need a new approach to this in the future?
Yeah, as you look at that, and you make a good point, I think that the number was $657 billion last year we did in trade between the U.S. and China. So we're the world's two largest economies. We are intertwined on a lot of different levels. For this to be kind of coming down to a local decision is a little bit insanity. We
Sure.
need federal guidance and federal policies. If you're going to, decide that Grand Forks needs to make these decisions on a national issue like this, I think we're in a lot bigger trouble than just this project. So we're intertwined a lot of levels, and I don't have a good answer where we draw the line. It's really tough. If things heat up geopolitically, that line's going to get moved forward really quickly, and I don't think this project can move forward. We all hope it goes in a better direction, but it's challenging right now, and it's the geopolitical climate makes it even worse.
I understand the point you're making. It's not on how in the world does the Grand Forks City Council have the resources to vet some of these larger questions. We really need answers from the federal government on that, and I completely understand that. But at times it can seem intractable. Like sometimes top-down decisions don't work. Our form of government is organized around the idea that people at the top make decisions, but we also have some checks and balances where sometimes they have to listen to the people at the bottom. And to me, I wonder if it seems like every community in America could kind of, and I don't want to say that this is an excuse because I don't feel like you're trying to dodge anything. That's not my intent. But it feels like everybody could kind of make that argument. Like, well, we're just Utica, New York. We're just Pasadena, California. How can we have a say in this? Let's just keep approving this stuff. And then, that amount of trade between us and a country that's putting millions of people in concentration camps gets larger. I mean, is there a point at which we have to say, no, I'm sorry, this hurts us locally, but we have to act locally to send a message about this?
Well, I mean, we're certainly, we love local control, especially in North Dakota and in Grand Forks. We love local control. So I'm not passing the buck off. All I'm saying is that
Sure.
would be more helpful. But we've received almost, zero guidance from a federal level and even at the state level. So it makes it more difficult. I'm not saying we're unwilling to make those decisions. We've always been pretty independent in the state of North Dakota and willing to do what's right on a moral and a value-based system.
Yeah, and I mean, from my point, I mean, when I hear someone like Brandon Bochenski, or I hear some of the other fine leaders in Grand Forks, or I hear Governor Burgum or Congressman Armstrong or Senator Hoeven, talking about some of these issues, that matters to me, right? I mean, if you folks are signing off on this, then it can't be a bad deal, understanding that you're doing all the due diligence. So I completely understand that, but it's such a struggle. And again, I think it's a new thing. I think Americans have been sleeping on these issues for so long, and we're waking up to them now. And some of the reaction is overwrought, people trying to do citizens arrest or whatnot, which maybe gets into it. Are there things we can do process-wise to make some of these things easier? Because on one hand, it's like we want lots of, whether we're building a pipeline and we're building a soybean crushing plant like down in Castleton that's become very controversial, not for any sort of foreign ties, but, there's some people upset at, it's too close to Castleton or what have you, to this corn milling plant in Grand Forks. It seems to me like we want public input, but there's a point at which you just have to make a decision and go forward. Do you think there needs to be changes at all to this process around these projects?
I don't know how you change that. With free speech, you got to let everyone voice their opinion,
Sure,
and hear them out. And there's a lot of emotion involved in it too. So it is helpful to allow people to speak. And does it make it tough sometimes? Like I said before, and you get personal attacks and they're taken away from the real issues. Absolutely. But in a capitalist and in a free market and in a free speech society, you got to let people speak. I don't know a better system that doesn't, in some way, sort of silence somebody. So you kind of got to leave it open to everybody.
Yeah, well, that's true. And it's important to have a process that validates people's concerns as well. I think it's easier to accept a political outcome that you may not have liked if you felt like you were heard along the way, right? You felt like, listen, I engaged, I just didn't convince enough people to have my point of view, so I lost. And while that doesn't make me happy, I can at least accept that. I think that's kind of the genius of the democratic process. Instead of somebody at the top just saying, this is the way it's going to be, and we're not even going to bother to listen to any of you, I think people get resentment, right? Even maybe people who might support the ultimate decision might feel resentment from that. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of our system, as difficult as it is. It's like playing a video game on the extra hard setting, right? Like, you just...
Well, yeah, and I can give you just an example. I mean, it was that one of the nights that we had this, there was a hate crime ordinance that was going through, and you had the room basically.
Yeah. By the way, how did you guys end up scheduling both of those debates on the same night? You just get it over with?
It just went that way, but you had the room exactly split on people that were there for that and people that were there for the corn mill. And I would say, some of the people probably agreed on being against this project. And that's probably the only thing that they've ever agreed on their entire life, between the two groups of people that were sitting in that room. So in some ways, I guess we did manage to bring some people closer together. So yeah, there you go.
I also create unity that way, and just making everybody upset at me. It's a practice and storied tradition. So going forward, I mean, if there's other companies that come, I mean, do you feel, one thing, I was recently talking with State Treasurer Thomas Beadle, and obviously he sits on the State Investment Board. And so one thing that they've been dealing with is divestment from Russia. But one of the things when I interviewed him that we talked about was saying, listen, I think the State Investment Board needs to develop a larger policy where we take into account, the riskiness of investing in China when China could invade Taiwan tomorrow, and suddenly what are those investments worth? We're not making money. This big divestment from Russia, we're trying to get rid of those investments in a market where everybody's selling off Russia, right? So who's buying at this point? Not many people, which means, the taxpayers are taking a bit of a bath there. Now, I think it's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. But I think there's also a question of when you invest in China, there's going to be risk attached. Because what if China does something that we just can't tolerate anymore? And then we got to divest from there and we're going to lose a whole bunch more money. So do you think, understanding, again, the limitations and scope of what the Grand Forks City Council can do, should there be a process or something to take into account that risk factor when evaluating projects like this?
Well, you got two different things. You got us investing in China and China investing here. I think when China invests here, we've got a lot more control because they're playing by our rules. Sure. In a lot of ways. Even what Russian oligarchs' assets can be seized. In Grand Forks, we're going to have a heck of a time if something happens with China already, because we're going to have to decide what to do with Cirrus Aircraft, which is owned by the Chinese government, which has a large manufacturing plant here. We also have the University of North Dakota, which has a large contingent of Chinese students and Chinese pilots in the flight program. So regardless of whether this plant comes, if there's increasing tensions with China, and especially if something happens in Taiwan, we're already going to have a little bit of a mess between those two things to have to figure out what to do with.
One thing I want to make clear too, the problem here is not the Chinese people, right? The problem here is not the Chinese students who are coming to North Dakota, coming to America to find education and find prosperity and to enrich our communities with their presence. The problem is not Chinese business people who are just trying to make a living in earnest and be successful in the same way so many American companies are. That's not the problem. And sometimes I'll tell you, it makes me uncomfortable to make some of these arguments that I'm making when I'm looking around and I'm seeing people who are making the same arguments, but they're motivated by they just don't like Chinese. And not everybody, but there's some that are clearly motivated by bigotry or racism, and that's not it. That's disgusting. I would love to do business with China. I wish China had a different government. That's the holdup. That's the sticking point.
Well, and that's the difficult part, even as we've had conversations on this, is you look at people who have a hard line that say you can't separate any business from the government there. And if you can't separate any business, how do you separate people who work at those businesses? So it is a challenge. Our culture in Grand Forks is made a lot more diverse and a lot better by the fact that the university has brought a lot of different people in. So it has made us kind of the cultural epicenter. Probably Fargo has exceeded us now, but there's a challenge, and I'm on the same boat with you, and it is difficult because some of this does come off as a little bit troublesome in the wrong path, where you want to be focused on what the government's doing, not what the people are doing.
So going forward with this project, are there any, what are you paying attention to? Is this what are your areas of concern? Understanding the process isn't over yet. There's some tests they have to pass yet. What are you watching for?
Well, the biggest concerns I have is environmental. Obviously, they've got to pass all the federal and state regulations on that. But odor is a big one. We can't have another factory that smells. We've got Simplot, which often has an odor. You've got American Crystal Sugar. It'd be really hard to put another plant and have another couple days where you've got more smell in town. So that's going to be a real issue. The plume, looking at the flight patterns and how the plume from the plant looks, that's going to be another big thing. And the traffic, we want to make sure that we can handle the traffic up there. It's a state highway, so we got to work with the DOT on that. And then, of course, just watching any of the geopolitical stuff and any moves that happen, federally, or any commentary we get back on any concerns on that front. Those would be the main things that I'm watching closely.
What is the city? I was looking at the package, and it seems a lot of what the city's put on the table is mostly investment in infrastructure. That's mostly going to be paid for either through state loans or COVID money or something that Fufeng is going to make up by paying for it in utilities. But what's the city's exposure if this project, if something pulls the plug on it? If for instance, somewhere in the next, we find something, one of the tests we don't like, or the geopolitical situation heats up and we decide we got to get out of China too, what's the city's exposure?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the company itself is going to be paying about $9.3 million upfront in payments for what their primary benefit is for water and wastewater, because there's some improvements that go beyond just benefiting the rest of the city, and they benefit the site.
And that was something the city was going to, wastewater was something the city was going to have to do anyway, right? They're just moving, it's almost like you're just moving that forward.
Exactly. So, that's the biggest chunk of it. That's about $50 million. So they've got about $4 million that that's sort of dedicated that we wouldn't do without them. So they're paying for that amount up front. So for example, that's a benefit for the city. We're moving a project forward. Our wastewater treatment plant's another item that has smelled, it hasn't been up to par, up to snuff for many years. So we need to get that done. And then there's a letter of credit for $5 million. So our exposure is really very little. If they pulled out of this halfway through, anything that was going to benefit them is already paid for. So we really have zero exposure. You could add, if you've got state money invested, you could certainly make the argument that some of your income tax has gone to that, or other pots of money have gone to that. But actual local taxpayer money, little to no exposure.
Well, that's a good thing to hear. What about like let's say they get the final approval, they break ground, they're building this facility, it's up. What's our exposure then? Does that change at all, or is it the same?
Well, I think at that point your exposure is, if you're talking financially alone, would be, say there is some sort of heat up, or they take over Taiwan and there's a divestiture or a move to kick these companies out. Then you have to find a buyer. Then you're looking for, does a Cargill come in? Does the plant go bankrupt? Financially, we wouldn't be hurt. Like I said, we've got the costs up front, but now you suddenly have 200, 300 direct jobs that are unemployed that just came here. So now you're looking for that type of risk and somebody to come in and buy the plant. That's, Cargill, ADM, something like that. So is that a perfect scenario? In some ways it might be, if that happens, but in other ways there's going to be a period where there's some people that are out of work looking for jobs.
What do you make some of the last questions here? There's going to be a push to try to force a citywide vote on the plant. What do you make? And understanding, I don't know, they have to get thousands of signatures within weeks, which I could tell you long ago, I don't really like the initiated measure process, but long ago I was involved in one, and I can tell you getting signatures is unless you have a bunch of money to pay people to go out, which I don't think this group does, it's hard work, and I don't know if they can do it. But assuming they do, what does that look like if they put this issue on the ballot?
Yeah, well, if they put it on the ballot, so far from what I'm understanding is they're wanting to put the development agreement on the ballot, which I struggle with. I think there's other things that make sense to put on the ballot, but the development agreement is giving us a protection and giving us a lot of the answers to the environmental, the odor, other things. So if you're stopping that, you suddenly put the city's risk. We're starting to pay for these studies, so now we have no mechanism to refund ourselves, and you're trying to make the decision on the plant before you have all the information. So these items, if they come back and there's concerns, they're going to go in front of city council. That would be the time to push back and stop it. You're trying to stop it now before you have that information, which makes me wonder, what exactly are you pushing back against? Then it probably gets more into the politics, the Chinese side. You're not as much worried about the infrastructure, the expenditures, because you're not getting that information yet and you're making a decision. So if it gets on the ballot, or if they get the signatures, we'll probably put it on the June primary ballot. And go that route, and then we'll wait to see what the answer is. It's part of the process. I'm totally okay with that if it works out that way.
Do you that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it that way. I mean, at this point, you're still getting answers to questions. I mean, there's going to be another vote, right, of the council after the tests and everything come in, and you guys basically vote. This is my very technical explanation of this. You guys basically vote and say, okay, the tests look good, let's go ahead, right? There's going to be another vote. Why not refer that vote to the ballot if you're going to do one?
Well, there's going to be votes, and there's going to be votes for rezoning and other things. But I would say this: if everything comes back, and like I said, we're using a third party. If everything comes back and there's no odor, we've tested this, we've gone through the whole process, the environmental concerns are very little, then the project would likely go through. And I don't know if there'd be a vote at that point. There'd have to be something that comes up that has at least some level of concern that's found by these third party consultants. Okay. And they do this every day. I mean, this is what they do. They've been a part of multiple plants like this across the country, so they can look at the specifications and the design and tell you exactly what's going to be happening.
Well, it's never an easy debate, but again, I mean, I think the most important point you made is how much of this is just the way we do things here. This is what accountable government looks like. It's hard and it's maddening at times, and sometimes you have to sit and listen to people that you don't really want to listen to. But that's the process. That's what our commitment to accountable government requires of us. So anyway, I thank you for your time today, Mr. Mayor, taking time from his vacation, by the way, to speak with me, if you can believe that. Hardworking guy. I tell you, I didn't even want to do it. I was so upset about learning my beloved Yankees got salary dumped. We're taking Josh Donaldson. You follow baseball at all? Taking Josh Donaldson and we're gonna pay $50 million for Josh Donaldson's decline years. We're the Yankees. What are we doing? We're supposed to dump our contracts on the Twins, not the other way around.
We could have taken Mauer from us a few years back when he was on the same decline. We could have used that salary.
You could have used that, salary dump, and just watch all these aging, decrepit stars on my Yankees. I don't know about that. Brandon, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yep, you take care. Thank you.
Want more political news like this? Visit inforum.news/port to get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Don't wait. Get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now.